Alright, so let's commit some fandom heresy and talk shit about a 3D Zelda game. Sounds like a fun time to me. Wind Waker was Zelda's first GameCube entry, coming off an excellent run on the N64. And while it took many players some time to adjust to the cartoony style, it's regarded nowadays not only as a masterpiece, but also as a game with a surprising amount of foresight. After all, a game designed to look realistic will look awful 2 or 3 years down the road. A game with a cartoony aesthetic will look cartoony 10 years down the road. But we aren't here to talk about aesthetics. We're here to address a fundamental problem with Wind Waker, and one that is completely unavoidable. Wind Waker is a fantastic Zelda game. After you clear the Forsaken Fortress. You'll visit this charming locale twice, but only the second time is a typical dungeon. The first time, a mere half hour into the game, it'll function as a mandatory stealth section. And it isn't a short one either. It's fair to say that the fort functions as an early game dungeon in terms of length. So, what are the problems here? Well, we'll start with the fact that you're given no means of neutralizing threats. The fort plays by Metal Gear Solid VR missions rules. Being caught means that you lose, and you have to start over. Now, this is nothing new to Zelda. Ocarina, for example, had the Gerudo Fortress. However, any ranged weapon in your arsenal could knock out patrolling Gerudo. This meant that inside, so long as you checked your corners, you could potentially complete your objective without ever being caught. Forsaken Fortress is not so merciful. Your only weapon at this point in the game is your sword, and you lose it as soon as you enter the dungeon. There is no new weapon to discover here either, so until you finish it, you're helpless. Your only recourse is to hide in barrels, and while you at least get some mobility when doing this, you're still a lot slower than you would be otherwise. The next problem is with the guards themselves, the moblins. Not only are they incredibly slow, but they're often very difficult to predict. Their movement pattern is fairly simple. Patrol in a straight line until that's no longer practical, stop and sniff for a few moments, then change direction. Most follow a simple back and forth movement pattern, but this is only a small mercy, as the cramped corridors of the fortress basically mean that this is the only movement pattern they'd be able to do in the first place. Now, here are the problems with that. First and foremost, the player is given no indication of what their line of sight is, nor how easily they can hear you move. It almost seems to be completely random. I've had times where I'll make a small movement 20 feet away and be spotted out of the back of the moblin's head, or I'll basically run headlong into the moblin's face with no repercussions. They seem to be slightly more aware when standing still, but that really doesn't help, given how schizophrenic their senses can be. The other problem actually ties into the simplicity of their movement. While in a barrel, you register as an obstacle in the moblin's path. When the moblin meets an obstacle, he'll stop, sniff around, then about face. While this can be abused while approaching them, it's actually very easy to lock them into place. And when they're basically just spinning in circles, you lose. What's worse is that some routes can easily move past you in one direction, but register as you as an obstacle in the other, even if you haven't moved at all. Tracking their movement can be difficult as well. Zelda games, traditionally, use a simple camera that can be centered behind you at any time. Wind Waker changes it up by using a 3D camera that's mapped to the C-stick. While it's a good idea in theory, the camera x-axis is inverted. It's difficult to keep an eye on a moblin when you move the stick right and the view shifts to your left. I know this wasn't as big a problem back before it was decided that the controls weren't inverted, but it has not helped the game's longevity. And the Wii U version actually winds up fixing this. More info about the Wii U version later. The entire fort isn't made up of moblins through the entire thing, though. So let's get back on topic here. There are other obstacles as well. We'll start with the level design itself. The level itself feels like it wants to be open-ended, with a number of entrances and exits all around a central area. Barely any of them mean anything, though. You have a singular objective here, your sword. By the time you get it, the level is basically over. What results is a frighteningly linear level with an arena-like design. Upon arrival, you're dropped right next to the central area. The first obstacle you actually encounter are a set of 4 spotlights. If you get caught by the spotlights, you're captured, same as when a moblin spots you. However, unlike the moblins, those spotlights can be turned off if you kill their operators. This is what you'll spend a large amount of time doing, as at least one of the spotlight operators must be killed to clear the stage. killing all four is the only way to complete the level in a reasonable time span, given the slow movement in barrels. The spotlights are located up on the ramparts. Getting up there is a matter of guesswork, as each rampart has a single ladder that leads to the top of it. Worse, only 3 of the ladders are on the inside of the fort wall. The one on the outside is the one that's necessary to deactivate, and the only one that it is necessary to deactivate. And killing the operators isn't fun either. Unlike moblins, the operators will try and kill you rather than capture you, and you have no sword. You do have a shield, though. Your only recourse is to block until they lose their grip on their heavy stick, then pick it up and fight them with it. This mechanic would be tedious if handled properly. Here, whether they drop the stick or not is up to blind luck. I've heard some people say you can make them drop it more easily if you block at the absolute last second. I have never had this work in actual practice. They're faster than, and whether or not they see the stick before you is blind luck. In the GameCube version, the Wii U version makes the arena a little bit lighter and spins the camera just in the direction the stick flies in, so it is a little bit more fair in the Wii U version. They're faster than you, so if they see it first, they'll beat you in a foot race to it. You can't pick up the stick if you're targeting them, so you're going to have to drop your block the second they drop it. Blocking requires you to target them. And if you somehow do manage to beat them to it, for God's sake, don't reflexively block, because you'll drop the stick, he'll grab it away and start wailing on you again. But if you do manage to get it and hold onto it, you can either throw it at them or hit them with it. And hitting them with it is not immediately obvious. The game doesn't tell you can just swing it. The only prompt on screen is to throw it, which throwing it, I assume, does a little bit more damage, but then you have to start this whole process over again from the beginning. Hitting them with it does less damage, so you're going to be doing it for longer, but at the very least you don't have to repeat the process. And you do this 4 times. You can't keep the stick either. Who knows, it might have been useful to take on the non-moblin enemies that like to swarm you in this level. And there are. Those stupid little imp things in the kitchen, the ones that go, da-hang, da-hang, all the time. You know the ones. Or, hell, stun the moblins with it. That would have been potentially useful anyway, if it wasn't for the fact that a total lack of moblins means you are heading in the right direction. Let's talk video game logic for a moment here. Typical video game logic states that if you encounter more enemies, you're heading in the right direction. Your sword is on the highest tower, but the only moblins you'll encounter are on the bottom ground floor. If I didn't have Tetra reminding me where it was, I would have headed down. I did wind up heading down a lot anyway, though. I was mostly hungry for rupees. Occasionally an enemy would knock me down there. But the thing about the bottom floor is there's basically nothing there except moblins. And a moblin catches you, they'll toss you in jail. Jail is on the middle floor. In other words, getting yourself caught is actually a faster way of getting back on track than actually trying to get back on track. So you spend ages in this dungeon before you're finally reunited with your sword. You fight a pathetically easy mini-boss, and then a cutscene happens. Your whole reason for coming here in the first place was to rescue your sister Errol. You get to see her for all of 2 seconds before the Hellmarok King that abducted her in the first place drops through the ceiling and throws you out to sea. Thank you, Nintendo. Glad to know all the hell I just went through wasn't even going to be worth it in the end. Now, Wind Waker is an excellent game. I want to make that clear. It deserves all the praise it gets. However, a section of this nature this early in the game is not fair to a new player, and I can imagine it chased away a lot of potential new Zelda fans when the game first released. If it came later on in the game, or was as open-ended as it clearly wants to be, or if it was a lot shorter, maybe it would be tolerable. But as is, it functions as a device to cut players off from a great game, and I just can't wrap my head around why. At least with the dreaded Water Temple trademark, it happens late enough in the game that the players are invested by now. Here, what was Nintendo thinking?